Hello, my dear witches and wizards. It's James. Welcome back to another evening of gentle stories and magical wanderings. Tonight, we're diving deep into the lore of the wizarding world, exploring some of the darker corners and brighter moments that make this universe so endlessly fascinating. Now, I've always found that the best way to understand the Harry Potter world isn't just through the main story, but through all those wonderful details that exist in the margins, the histories that shaped the characters we love, the creatures that inhabit this magical realm, and the conflicts that tested everyone's courage. So, tonight we're going to meander through some of these topics together, and I promise to keep things cozy and conversational, like we're sitting by the fire in the Gryffindor common room, just talking about all the things that make this world so special. Let me start by saying that when you really begin to look at the Harry Potter universe beyond just Harry's immediate journey, you realize how much darkness exists alongside all that wonder and magic. And perhaps nowhere is that darkness more tangible, more physically oppressive than in the existence of Dementors. These creatures have always fascinated me because they represent something so fundamentally horrifying, yet they're treated almost casually by the wizarding authorities for most of the series. Dementors are, in essence, the physical manifestation of depression and despair, which is a concept that feels almost too real when you think about it. Nobody actually knows what Dementors truly are, which is part of what makes them so unsettling. They're not born, at least not in any conventional sense. They simply exist, drawn to places where misery and suffering are concentrated. Some magical theorists believe they're a type of non-being, entities that have never been alive in the traditional sense, but are instead the absence of hope given form and purpose. They glide rather than walk, their decaying skeletal hands reaching out from beneath those tattered black cloaks, and where their faces should be, there's just an empty void hidden beneath a hood. Well, empty until they need to feed, and then that hood comes back to reveal something far worse. The way Dementors feed is particularly cruel. They don't need physical sustenance. Instead, they consume human happiness, every positive feeling and warm memory you possess. When a Dementor is near, you experience your worst memories, your most traumatic moments, as if they're happening all over again. The air becomes cold, frost forms on windows, and all the light seems to drain from the world. For Harry, being near Dementors meant reliving his mother's murder, hearing her screams as she tried to protect him. That's what they do. They force you to confront your absolute worst moments while they drain away everything good inside you. And the more they feed, the more they want, until eventually there's nothing left of you but an empty shell. But feeding on happiness, as terrible as that is, isn't even the worst thing Dementors can do. The Dementor's kiss is something else entirely, something that the wizarding world considers worse than death itself. When a Dementor performs the kiss, it clamps its mouth, if you can call that gaping void a mouth, over a victim's mouth and literally sucks out their soul. The body survives, technically. The heart keeps beating. The lungs keep breathing, but there's nothing left inside. No consciousness, no personality, no memories or dreams or fears. Just an empty vessel that will live on indefinitely in a vegetative state. Sirius Black was threatened with this fate, and you could see the absolute terror in his eyes at the prospect. Even Barty Crouch Jr., evil as he was, deserved better than that. It's a fate so horrific that it makes death seem merciful by comparison. What's almost as disturbing as the Dementors themselves is the fact that the Ministry of Magic actively employed them as guards at Azkaban prison for centuries. Think about that for a moment. The wizarding government, the institution supposedly dedicated to protecting magical society, chose to use creatures that literally feed on human suffering to guard their prisoners. Yes, Azkaban held dangerous criminals, but the punishment of being constantly drained of all happiness, of being forced to relive your worst memories day after day, year after year, seems like a punishment that far exceeds even the most serious crimes. No wonder so many prisoners went insane. No wonder Sirius said that the only thing that kept him sane was knowing he was innocent, and even that barely sustained him for 12 years. The Ministry's justification was always that Dementors were the perfect guards because they were immune to bribes and couldn't be fooled by magic. They didn't care about your blood status or your connections or your wealth. They simply existed to feed, and a prison full of miserable souls provided an endless buffet. But the real reason the Ministry used them, I think, was fear and convenience. Dementors naturally gravitate toward darkness, toward places where hope is scarce and despair is abundant. They're attracted to it the way moths are drawn to flame. Azkaban, that fortress on a tiny island in the North Sea, was the perfect habitat for them. The Ministry didn't have to pay them or train them or worry about their loyalty. They just had to let them feast on prisoners, and in return, they got guards who would never let anyone escape. Of course, this arrangement came crashing down during Voldemort's return. Dementors, being creatures of darkness and despair, were naturally drawn to him. He offered them something even better than Azkaban, the freedom to feed wherever they wanted, to spread misery and terror across all of Britain rather than being confined to one prison. The mass breakout from Azkaban, the attacks on Muggles, the sense of creeping dread that hung over the wizarding world during that time, much of it was because the Dementors had switched sides. Or perhaps more accurately, they'd simply gone where the darkness was strongest. There's something deeply meaningful about the connection between Dementors and depression that J.K. Rowling has discussed in interviews. She's spoken about how she was dealing with clinical depression when she created Dementors, and they represent that feeling of emptiness, of being unable to feel joy, of having all the color drained from the world. The physical symptoms match too: the cold, the sense of isolation, the way everything feels heavy and hopeless. And just like with depression, the only real defense against Dementors is to hold on to positive memories, to actively cultivate hope and happiness, even when it seems impossible. The Patronus charm works by channeling your happiest memory, by creating a guardian from pure positive emotion. It's a beautiful metaphor, really. This idea that the only way to fight despair is with joy, deliberately chosen and fiercely protected. Speaking of creatures that embody darkness, although in a very different way, we should talk about basilisks. Now, where Dementors represent the emotional and psychological darkness of the wizarding world, basilisks represent something more primal, more ancient, and monstrous. These are the Serpent Kings, creatures of legend that have haunted wizarding history for over 1,000 years. The creation of a basilisk is itself an act of dark magic, which tells you everything you need to know about these creatures. According to magical texts, you breed a basilisk by placing a chicken egg beneath a toad, and somehow, through dark, magical processes that are thankfully illegal and closely guarded, a serpent hatches. Not just any serpent, mind you, but a massive snake that can grow to 50 feet or more in length, with brilliant green scales and enormous yellow eyes. Those eyes are the basilisk's most dangerous weapon, because to look directly into them means instant death. Not a curse, not a poison, just death, immediate and irreversible. The interesting thing about the basilisk's killing stare, and by interesting I mean absolutely terrifying, is that it works through eye contact. Direct eye contact means you're dead before you hit the ground. But if you see a basilisk's gaze indirectly, through a reflection or through something else, you're merely petrified instead. Still not great, obviously. Being frozen like a statue, fully conscious but unable to move or speak, is its own special nightmare. But at least petrification can be reversed with properly brewed mandrake restorative draft, whereas death is somewhat more permanent. This is how everyone at Hogwarts managed to survive during Harry's second year when the Chamber of Secrets was opened. Pure luck, really, combined with the quick thinking of Hermione Granger, who figured out what the monster was before she was petrified herself. Nearly headless Nick saw the basilisk through his own translucent form, already being dead, saved him from dying again, though he was still petrified. Colin Creevey saw it through his camera. Justin Finch Fletchley saw it through Nick. Mrs. Norris saw it reflected in water. Hermione saw it in a mirror she'd been using to look around corners. Each time, indirect sight saved them from death and left them merely petrified instead, which sounds absurd when you say it like that, but in context was absolutely life-saving. The basilisk that lived in the Chamber of Secrets was Salazar Slytherin's monster, bred and hidden there nearly 1,000 years before Harry ever arrived at Hogwarts. Slytherin, in his paranoia and his twisted belief in pure blood supremacy, created this creature as a weapon to be used against those he deemed unworthy of learning magic. The chamber could only be opened by his heir, someone who spoke Parseltongue, the language of serpents. It was meant to be used to purge the school of Muggle-born students, which is such a horrifically violent manifestation of prejudice that it's hard to even comprehend. Slytherin essentially built a weapon of mass murder into the school he helped found and left instructions for his descendants to unleash it. Tom Riddle, who would become Voldemort, opened the chamber during his 5th year at Hogwarts. He was Slytherin's heir, a Parselmouth, and he was already well on his way to becoming a monster himself. He used the basilisk to kill Myrtle Warren, Moaning Myrtle as she became known, and he would have continued his reign of terror if Dumbledore hadn't been closing in on him. So Riddle did what he would always do. He found a way to preserve himself and his plans. He closed the chamber, framed Hagrid and his Acromantula Aragog for the attacks, and waited. 50 years later, he tried again, this time through his preserved memory in the diary, using Ginny Weasley as his puppet. The only ways to kill a basilisk are as unusual as the creature itself. A rooster's crow is fatal to them, which is why Tom Riddle, possessing Ginny, had her kill all of Hagrid's roosters. There's something almost fairy tale-like about that weakness, this massive serpent king defeated by the morning song of a barnyard chicken. The other method is more conventional, more heroic in the classical sense. You need a weapon powerful enough to pierce its scales and the courage to face it. Harry managed it with Gryffindor's sword, which Fawkes delivered to him in the chamber. The sword, being goblin-made, absorbed the basilisk's venom when Harry stabbed it through the roof of the creature's mouth, making it one of the few weapons capable of destroying Horcruxes. So even in death, the basilisk played a crucial role in Voldemort's eventual defeat, though that wouldn't become clear for years. Basilisks can be controlled through Parseltongue, which makes them even more dangerous in the wrong hands. Tom Riddle commanded it with ease, sending it through the pipes of Hogwarts to hunt Muggleborns. The snake obeyed him perfectly, because that's what basilisks do when faced with someone who speaks their language. They're intelligent creatures, cunning in their way, and they live for centuries if left undisturbed. The chamber's basilisk had been alive for 1,000 years, growing larger and more dangerous with each passing decade, sustained by rats and whatever else it could catch in the depths beneath the school. A millennium of isolation and hunger, waiting for a Parselmouth to open the chamber and give it purpose again. Now, while we're discussing creatures touched by darkness, we should turn our attention to werewolves, because their story is perhaps the most tragic of all the dark creatures in the wizarding world. Werewolves aren't born evil or inherently monstrous. They're victims of a magical disease, of lycanthropy, and the prejudice they face from wizarding society is one of the most shameful aspects of that world. Lycanthropy is transmitted through a bite, though not every bite from a werewolf will pass on the curse. The victim has to survive the attack first, which many don't, and then the transformation begins with the next full moon. Once a month, every month, for the rest of their lives, werewolves undergo an agonizing transformation from human to wolf. Bones break and reform, muscles tear and rebuild, and the person's consciousness is subsumed by the wolf's hunting instinct. During transformation, werewolves feel everything. It's described as the worst pain imaginable, worse than the Cruciatus curse in its way, because it happens slowly, deliberately, over the course of several minutes. And there's no relief, no unconsciousness to escape into. You're aware the entire time, feeling your humanity slip away as the beast takes over. Remus Lupin's story really illustrates the tragedy of lycanthropy. He was bitten as a small child by Fenrir Greyback, who I'll talk about more in a moment, and from that point forward, his life was defined by his condition. His parents loved him, did everything they could to help him, but nothing could cure lycanthropy. Every month, young Remus would transform in increasingly desperate attempts to keep it secret. He couldn't play with other children for fear of hurting them during a transformation. He couldn't attend school because no institution would accept a werewolf. His entire childhood was marked by isolation, pain, and shame. Dumbledore changed that by allowing Remus to attend Hogwarts. The Whomping Willow was planted to guard the entrance to the Shrieking Shack, which became Remus's transformation space. His friends, James, Sirius, and Peter, became animagi, so they could keep him company during his transformations, because werewolves only pose a danger to humans, not to animals. It was an act of such profound friendship, such loyalty, that it's hard not to feel emotional thinking about it. They literally learned incredibly advanced, dangerous, illegal magic as teenagers, just so their friend wouldn't have to suffer alone. But even with that support, even with Dumbledore's protection, Remus faced a lifetime of discrimination. After Hogwarts, he couldn't find work. Nobody would hire a werewolf, regardless of his qualifications or his character. He lived in poverty, wearing shabby clothes and looking perpetually ill because transformations took such a toll on his body. When he finally got the Defense Against the Dark Arts position at Hogwarts, it was the first real job he'd ever had, and he was brilliant at it. The students loved him. He was kind, patient, knowledgeable, everything a teacher should be. But the moment Snape revealed his condition, he was forced to resign. One parent's complaint would have been enough to end his career, so he left before that could happen. The prejudice ran that deep. The anti-werewolf legislation in the wizarding world is absolutely draconian. Werewolves are required to register with the ministry, which means they can be tracked and monitored. They're forbidden from holding most jobs. They can't adopt children. They're essentially second-class citizens, or perhaps not even citizens at all, more like tolerated monsters who are one step away from being locked up or destroyed. And this despite the fact that, for all but one night a month, they're completely human, completely harmless. The only breakthrough that made life even slightly bearable for werewolves was the invention of wolfsbane potion, which allows a werewolf to maintain their human mind during transformation. They still transform, still feel the pain, but they remain themselves, which means they don't pose a danger to others. It's not a cure, just a treatment, and it's expensive and difficult to brew. But for those who can access it, like Remus when Snape brewed it for him at Hogwarts, it's the difference between being a monster and being yourself. And then there's Fenrir Greyback, who represents the absolute worst of what a werewolf can become when they embrace their condition as a weapon. Greyback deliberately positioned himself near children when he transformed, biting young victims to create more werewolves. He saw himself as creating an army, turning innocent children into monsters who would grow up hating the wizarding society that rejected them. He bit Remus when Remus was only 4 or 5 years old, not during a hunt or an accident, but as revenge against Remus's father, who had insulted him. Greyback weaponized lycanthropy, used it as a tool of terror and revenge. He eventually aligned himself with Voldemort because it gave him the freedom to bite and kill without consequence. The Death Eaters didn't care about his victims. In fact, they encouraged his savagery. It's telling that even among Death Eaters, many found Greyback repulsive, not because he was a werewolf, but because he enjoyed inflicting suffering so much. He wasn't fighting for a cause or an ideology. He just wanted to hurt people, and Voldemort gave him permission to do that. The contrast between Remus Lupin and Fenrir Greyback perfectly encapsulates the choice that faces anyone dealing with a terrible condition or circumstance. Remus chose to remain kind, to fight against his condition, to never let it define his character. Greyback chose to embrace the darkness, to become the monster that people feared. And wizarding society's treatment of werewolves pushed many toward Greyback's path. When you're told you're a monster often enough, when you're denied basic rights and dignity, when you're forced to live in poverty and isolation, the temptation to become what they fear must be almost overwhelming. That most werewolves, despite all this, chose to remain peaceful speaks to a resilience and dignity that their society absolutely didn't deserve. While we're exploring the darker aspects of the wizarding world's creatures, we should discuss Inferi, because they represent perhaps the most disturbing use of magic in Voldemort's arsenal. Inferi are corpses, dead bodies that have been reanimated through the darkest forms of necromancy. They're not undead in the sense of having any consciousness or will of their own. They're puppets, animated by a dark wizard's magic, commanded to attack and kill on behalf of their creator. Voldemort created an army of Inferi and hid them in the lake in the cave where he'd hidden one of his Horcruxes. That cave held special significance for him because he'd terrorized 2 children from his orphanage there when he was young, discovering his power and taking pleasure in cruelty even then. Returning there to hide the locket Horcrux, he filled the lake with corpses he'd animated, creating a scene of absolute horror. Dumbledore and Harry encountered them when they retrieved the locket, and the description of those dead hands reaching up from the water, pale and grasping, dragging at Harry, pulling him under. It's the stuff of nightmares. The creation of inferi is considered one of the darkest forms of magic because it's such a profound desecration of the dead. Death is supposed to be sacred, even in the wizarding world. The dead are meant to rest, to move on to whatever comes next, to reanimate a corpse, to use it as a weapon or a guardian, violates something fundamental about the respect owed to human remains. It's a violation not just of the body, but of the memory of the person who once inhabited it. Every inferius in that lake had been someone, had lived and loved and died, and Voldemort turned them into mindless guardians without thought or care for who they'd been. The only effective defense against inferi is fire. They fear it, recoil from it, and can be destroyed by it. Dumbledore created a massive ring of fire around Harry and himself, driving the inferi back into the lake. It's one of the few times we see Dumbledore use magic in a purely aggressive, overwhelming display of power, and it worked perfectly. But the knowledge that such creatures exist, that dark, wizards can create armies of the dead, adds another layer of horror to the world. It's not enough to kill Voldemort's followers. You have to worry about them coming back as animated corpses, still dangerous, still murderous, but now completely beyond pain or reason or mercy. Talking about all these dark creatures, I think it's important to shift our focus a bit towards some of the more magnificent beings that inhabit the wizarding world. Not everything in this universe is designed to drain your soul, or drink your blood, or tear you apart. Some creatures are genuinely wondrous, even if they're often misunderstood or feared. Dragons, for instance, are about as magnificent as magical creatures get. Yes, they're incredibly dangerous. Yes, they breathe fire and have hides so tough that most spells bounce right off. Yes, they've been known to eat humans on occasion, but there's something undeniably awe-inspiring about them. These are massive, powerful, intelligent creatures that represent the very essence of wild magic. They can't be truly tamed, only trained to some degree, and even then, it's less about dominance and more about mutual respect and very careful handling. There are multiple dragon breeds, each with their own characteristics and temperaments. The Hungarian horntail is considered one of the most dangerous, with black scales, bronze horns, and a particularly aggressive nature. That's the dragon Harry faced during the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, which still seems like an absolutely insane challenge to give 14-year-old students. The Welsh Green is more docile, relatively speaking, with a melodious roar and a preference for eating sheep rather than people. The Chinese Fireball, also called the Lion Dragon, has scarlet scales and shoots mushroom-shaped flames from its nostrils. Each breed is unique, adapted to different environments and climates across the magical world. Charlie Weasley, Ron's second oldest brother, works with dragons in Romania at a dragon reserve. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the wizarding world, but also one of the most rewarding for those who love magical creatures. Dragon handlers study the creature's behavior, help with conservation efforts, collect materials like blood and heartstrings for wand cores, and generally try to keep these magnificent beasts from causing too much destruction. Dragon hide is used for protective gloves and shields because it's nearly impenetrable. Dragon heartstring is one of the 3 main wand cores, producing powerful and flashy magic. Dragon blood has 12 uses, though the exact list isn't fully known. Everything about dragons is valuable, which unfortunately led to centuries of overhunting until regulations were put in place. The Triwizard Tournament's first task really showcased both the majesty and the absolute terror of dragons. 4 students, 4 different dragon breeds, each one protecting a clutch of eggs with maternal aggression. Watching Harry try to outfly a horntail on his firebolt, dodging flames and trying to snatch a golden egg from among the real ones, it was both thrilling and horrifying. Because dragons aren't evil, they're not malicious like dementors or deliberately cruel like dark wizards. They're just incredibly powerful predators operating on instinct. A mother dragon protecting her eggs will incinerate anything that comes close, not out of malice, but out of biological imperative. The saddest dragon story, in my opinion, is the Ukrainian ironbelly that Gringotts kept chained in their deepest vault. This massive, partially blind dragon was trained through pain and conditioned responses to fear the sound of clanking metal, which the goblins used to control it. Years, possibly decades, of captivity and abuse, all to guard the Lestrange vault. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione freed it during their break-in, you could feel its desperate need for freedom, the way it crashed through the bank and soared into the sky, probably for the first time in years. Dragons aren't meant to be chained. They're meant to fly, to hunt, to exist as the apex predators of the magical world. Seeing one enslaved like that feels fundamentally wrong. Now, moving to a creature that's about as far from a dragon's destructive power as you can get, let's talk about phoenixes. If dragons represent wild, untamable power, then phoenixes represent something more mystical, more tied to concepts of loyalty and rebirth and magic in its purest form. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, is the only one we really get to know in the series, and through him, we learn about these extraordinary birds. Phoenixes have a remarkable life cycle. When they reach the end of their natural lifespan, they don't die in the conventional sense. Instead, they burst into flames, burning down to ashes, and then are reborn from those same ashes as a chick. It's cyclical, eternal, a perfect symbol of renewal and continuity. They can theoretically live forever through this process, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of all their previous lives. Fawkes was incredibly old, ancient perhaps, though exactly how old is never specified. The bond between a phoenix and their chosen wizard is profound, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than ownership or control. The tears of a phoenix have powerful healing properties, capable of curing poison and healing serious wounds. When Harry was bitten by the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, the venom should have killed him in minutes. Basilisk venom is one of the most destructive substances in existence, capable of destroying even Horcruxes. But Fawkes cried into Harry's wound, and those tears neutralized the venom, healing him completely. It was a moment of pure magic, the kind that reminds you that for all the darkness in this world, there's also incredible light. Phoenix song is another remarkable trait. When a phoenix sings, it has different effects depending on the listener's heart. For those who are pure of heart, the song is beautiful and strengthening, filling them with courage and hope. Fawkes' song gave Harry the strength to fight the basilisk, helped him find the courage to face what seemed like certain death. For those with darkness in their hearts, though, Phoenix song inspires fear. It's as if the bird's music reflects back at you your own internal state, offering comfort to the good and warning to the wicked. Phoenixes are incredibly rare, to the point where many witches and wizards go their entire lives without seeing one. They can't be bought or captured. They choose their companions, and not everyone is worthy of that choice. The fact that Dumbledore had a phoenix, that Fawkes chose to stay with him for so many years, tells you something important about Dumbledore's character. Whatever mistakes he made, Whatever questionable decisions he took, there was fundamental goodness in him that Fawkes recognized and valued. When Dumbledore died, Fawkes sang one last lament and left Hogwarts forever. Without his chosen companion, without that bond, the Phoenix had no reason to remain. It's heartbreaking in its way, this idea that such a magnificent creature would choose solitude over finding a new wizard to bond with, but it also speaks to the depth of loyalty Phoenixes possess. Speaking of misunderstood creatures, we absolutely have to talk about Thestrals, because these skeletal, bat-winged horses are perhaps the most unfairly feared creatures in the series. Thestrals are only visible to those who have witnessed death and processed what they've seen. It's not just about being present when someone dies. You have to truly understand what happened, accept the reality of death. That's why Harry couldn't see them after Quirrell's death at the end of his first year, but could see them clearly after Cedric's murder. He'd witnessed Quirrell die, but hadn't processed it, hadn't truly understood what death meant. After watching Cedric be killed right in front of him, after seeing the light leave his eyes, Harry understood death in a way he hadn't before. To those who can't see them, Thestrals seem incredibly creepy. They're skeletal, with visible bones under taut black skin, leathery wings, and white, staring eyes. They look like something out of a nightmare, like death given physical form. But to those who can see them, who understand them, Thestrals are actually quite gentle and intelligent. They're attracted to the scent of blood, which doesn't help their reputation, but they're not violent or aggressive. They're just carnivorous, feeding on raw meat the way any predator would. Luna Lovegood and Harry shared a connection through Thestrals, both being able to see them when others couldn't. Luna had seen her mother die in a magical accident when she was 9 years old, and she'd been able to see Thestrals ever since. She never feared them, never saw them as omens of death or bad luck like so many others did. To Luna, they were just another type of magical creature, interesting and worthy of kindness. That perspective, that ability to see the beauty in things others found disturbing, was very Luna. She had a way of cutting through superstition and fear to see things as they actually were. Thestrals pull the Hogwarts carriages from Hogsmeade Station to the castle, which means that to most students, the carriages appear to move by themselves. It's only students who've experienced death who see the creatures pulling them, which must be a strange, somewhat melancholic experience. You're returning to school, excited or nervous, or both, and suddenly you can see these skeletal horses that you'd never noticed before. It's a visible marker of having lost someone, of having crossed a threshold that you can never uncross. But it's also a reminder that death is a natural part of life, and that understanding death doesn't have to mean fearing it. The fact that Hogwarts uses Thestrals for transportation is actually quite fitting. They're loyal, intelligent, have an excellent sense of direction, and can travel incredibly long distances at high speeds. They're also invisible to most people, which provides a certain level of security. During the flight to London to reach the Ministry of Magic in Harry's 5th year, Thestrals carried Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and Luna through the night sky. Most of them couldn't see their mounts, had to trust that they were actually there, which must have been a surreal experience. Flying through the air on an invisible creature, holding on to what feels like nothing, faith being the only thing keeping you from panicking. Now, while we're discussing creatures who serve and assist, we need to talk about house elves, because their situation is one of the most morally complex aspects of the wizarding world. House elves are bound to serve wizarding families, magically enslaved in a way that most wizards simply accept as normal. They're small, with large eyes and bat-like ears, possessing incredibly powerful magic that exceeds what many wizards can do. They can apparate inside Hogwarts where wizards can't, can perform wandless magic, can accomplish household tasks with a snap of their fingers. Yet they're bound to serve, compelled by ancient magic to obey their master's commands. The truly disturbing part is that most house elves don't want freedom. They've been conditioned over countless generations to view servitude as their natural state, to take pride in their work, to feel shame and distress at the thought of being freed. Wizarding families give them cast-off clothes because clothing is how you free a house elf, and most elves view this as the ultimate insult, the worst punishment their masters could inflict. They want to serve. They need to serve. The magic that binds them has, over centuries or possibly millennia, become so deeply ingrained that it's part of their nature. Dobby was revolutionary because he wanted freedom, fought for it, and found joy in it. Working for Dumbledore at Hogwarts, being paid and having time off, wearing his collection of mismatched socks and hats, these things made Dobby genuinely happy. But other house elves looked at him with confusion or even disgust. Winky, after being freed by Barty Crouch Sr., fell into depression and alcoholism, unable to cope with her newfound freedom. She hadn't wanted it, hadn't asked for it, and it destroyed her sense of purpose and identity. Kreacher's story is perhaps the most complex and tragic of all the house elves we meet. He was the Black family house elf, loyal to their pure blood ideology, deeply attached to Sirius's mother and her bigoted views. When Sirius inherited Grimmauld Place, Kreacher resented him, undermined him, ultimately betrayed him by telling Bellatrix and Narcissa about Harry and Sirius's relationship. That betrayal led directly to Sirius's death, making Kreacher partially responsible for one of the series' most heartbreaking losses. But here's the thing about Kreacher. He wasn't evil. He was a product of his environment, shaped by the family he served, loyal to their values, because that's what house elves do. And when Harry, Ron, and Hermione treated him with kindness, when they gave him Regulus's locket and acknowledged Regulus's bravery, something changed in Kreacher. He began to soften, to care for them, to actively help them. By the Battle of Hogwarts, Kreacher was leading the House Elves of Hogwarts into battle, fighting for Harry, fighting against the Death Eaters. It was redemption, not just for Kreacher, but for the idea that kindness and respect can change hearts, even ones that have been hardened by decades of bitterness. The house elf situation raises uncomfortable questions about the wizarding world's ethics. Here's a society that fought against Voldemort's pure-blood supremacy, that claimed to value equality and justice, yet they enslaved an entire species and saw nothing wrong with it. Most wizards treated house elves like appliances, barely acknowledging their existence, certainly not considering their feelings or rights. Hermione's SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, was mocked by her friends and ignored by everyone else. Even Harry, who genuinely liked Dobby and appreciated Kreacher, didn't really engage with the larger question of house elf rights. It's a reminder that good people can participate in systemic injustice without recognizing it, can be blind to oppression that's been normalized by their society. The wizarding world's treatment of house elves, goblins, werewolves, and other non-human magical beings reveals a deeply prejudiced society, one that's only marginally better than the pure-blood supremacists they fought against. Different targets, different justifications, but the same fundamental belief in a hierarchy of beings with wizards naturally at the top. Now that we've spent time thinking about the creatures of this world, both dark and light, think we should shift our focus to the wizards who chose darkness, who aligned themselves with Voldemort and his ideology of pure blood supremacy and magical domination. The Death Eaters weren't just soldiers following orders. They were believers, or at least most of them were, committed to a vision of a wizarding world that was darker, crueler, and more stratified than anything we see even in the worst moments of the Ministry's incompetence. The Death Eaters emerged from Tom Riddle's school days, though they didn't have that name initially. At Hogwarts, Riddle gathered followers, mostly Slytherins from pure-blood families, students who were drawn to his charisma, his power, his vision of wizarding superiority. They called themselves the Knights of Walpurgis, a pretentious name that reflected their view of themselves as noble warriors rather than terrorists. After leaving school, as Riddle transformed into Voldemort, the group evolved into the Death Eaters, taking the dark mark as their symbol, a skull with a serpent protruding from its mouth. Its grotesque imagery, deliberately chosen to inspire fear. The ideology was simple but seductive for those who already believed in pure-blood supremacy. Voldemort promised a world where pure-blood wizards ruled, where Muggles knew their place as inferiors, where Muggle-borns were eliminated or enslaved, and where magical power determined your worth. For wealthy families like the Malfoys, who already had power and status, Voldemort offered more, the chance to rule without the constraints of law or morality. For those with less wealth but strong belief in blood purity, he offered importance, a chance to be part of something significant. And for those with darker inclinations, those who enjoyed cruelty for its own sake, he offered permission to indulge every sadistic impulse without consequence. The dark mark served multiple purposes. Branded onto the forearm of every Death Eater, it was both badge and summons. When Voldemort touched his own mark, every Death Eater felt their marks burn and knew they were being called. Wherever they were, whatever they were doing, they were expected to apparate immediately to his side. Failure to respond brought punishment, usually in the form of the Cruciatus Curse. The mark also served as a calling card, conjured in the sky over sites of Death Eater attacks, glowing green and sinister, a sign that someone had died, that the Death Eaters had struck. Seeing that skull in the sky became one of the most feared sights in Wizarding Britain. Why did people join? The reasons varied. Some were true believers, raised on stories of wizarding superiority and Muggle inferiority, genuinely convinced that Voldemort's vision was right and just. Others were motivated by ambition, seeing an opportunity to gain power and influence they couldn't achieve through legitimate means. Some joined out of fear, believing that Voldemort would win and that joining him was the only way to survive. And some, like Peter Pettigrew, joined because they were cowards who wanted to be on what they perceived as the winning side, regardless of morality or principle. Among the Death Eaters, certain figures stand out, forming Voldemort's inner circle, his most trusted and capable followers. Bellatrix Lestrange, born Bellatrix Black, was perhaps the most fanatical. Her devotion to Voldemort bordered on romantic obsession, though whether Voldemort was capable of returning any such feeling is doubtful. He valued her loyalty, her magical skill, her complete willingness to commit any atrocity in his name. But love wasn't something Voldemort understood or desired. Bellatrix was a sadist who took genuine pleasure in torture and murder, who laughed while casting the Cruciatus Curse, who saw causing pain as an art form. Her torture of Frank and Alice Longbottom, Neville's parents, is one of the most horrible acts in the series. Along with her husband Rodolphus, his brother Rabiston, and Barty Crouch Jr., Bellatrix tortured the Longbottoms for hours, trying to extract information about Voldemort's whereabouts after his first downfall. They used the Cruciatus Curse relentlessly, breaking the Longbottoms' minds completely and irreversibly. Frank and Alice survived physically, but mentally they were destroyed, left in St. Mungo's hospital with no recognition of their son, no memory of who they'd been, just empty shells of the brave Aurors they'd once been. Bellatrix showed no remorse. Even years later, imprisoned in Azkaban, she spoke of it with pride. Her death at Molly Weasley's hands during the Battle of Hogwarts was both shocking and deeply satisfying. Molly, generally portrayed as motherly and warm, became a force of nature when Bellatrix nearly killed Ginny. The duel was brief but intense, and Molly's killing curse was perhaps the most cathartic moment of the entire battle. Bellatrix died the way she lived, through violence, but this time she was on the receiving end. Lucius Malfoy represents a different type of Death Eater, the wealthy, influential pureblood who used his position to advance Voldemort's agenda through social and political channels, as well as violence. The Malfoys had money, prestige, connections, all of which Lucius leveraged to the Death Eater's advantage. He donated to causes that would gain him influence, curried favor with ministry officials, positioned himself as a respectable member of society while secretly working to undermine everything the ministry stood for. When Voldemort first fell, Lucius claimed he'd been under the Imperious Curse, that he'd never willingly served the Dark Lord. It was a lie, but it was a convenient lie that many pureblood families used to escape justice. The Malfoys paid their way out of trouble, donated to the right causes, said the right things, and emerged from the First War unscathed. Lucius continued his work more subtly, slipping Tom Riddle's diary to Ginny Weasley, attempting to discredit Arthur Weasley and Dumbledore, always working toward the day when Voldemort would return and reward his faithful servants. But Lucius's fall from grace was spectacular. His failure at the Department of Mysteries, losing the prophecy and getting captured, made him a liability in Voldemort's eyes. The Malfoy family went from being favored servants to barely tolerated failures. Voldemort took Lucius's wand, used Malfoy Manor as his headquarters, humiliated Lucius at every opportunity. By the end, Lucius was a broken man, more concerned with his family's survival than with Voldemort's victory. In the final battle, the Malfoys fled, abandoning their master to save themselves. It wasn't noble or brave, but it was human, a family choosing each other over ideology. And then there's Severus Snape, whose story is so complex, so layered, that entire essays could be written about his motivations and choices. Snape joined the Death Eaters as a young man, drawn by their promises of power and importance, perhaps seeking belonging after years of poverty and bullying. He was talented, particularly in potions and the dark arts, and Voldemort recognized that talent. Snape became a Death Eater, took the Dark Mark, participated in Voldemort's first rise. But everything changed when Snape overheard part of the prophecy and reported it to Voldemort, not knowing it would lead the Dark Lord to target the Potters. When he realized Lily was in danger, Lily Evans, who he'd loved since childhood, despite all his mistakes and all the ways he'd pushed her away, Snape went to Dumbledore. He begged Dumbledore to hide the Potters, to protect Lily, offering anything in return. Dumbledore agreed, but only if Snape truly switched sides, became a spy, worked to undermine Voldemort from within. Lily died anyway, killed by the very information Snape had provided, and that guilt defined the rest of Snape's life. He spent nearly 2 decades as a double agent, one of the most dangerous positions in the wizarding world. He had to maintain Voldemort's trust while actually working for Dumbledore, had to commit terrible acts to maintain his cover, had to watch Harry, Lily's son, grow up while being unable to show any of the care he actually felt. Snape's cruelty toward Harry, toward Neville, toward most of his students, was partially genuine bitterness and resentment, but it was also necessary to maintain his image as a Death Eater sympathizer. He couldn't show softness, couldn't reveal his true loyalties, because any slip would mean death. When Snape killed Dumbledore, following Dumbledore's own orders, it cemented his position as Voldemort's most trusted servant. Nobody suspected him after that. How could they? He'd killed Dumbledore, something even Bellatrix hadn't managed. But it also made him reviled by everyone in the Order, marked him as a traitor and a murderer in the eyes of everyone who'd fought alongside him. He died alone, killed by Voldemort's snake on Voldemort's orders, bleeding out in the shrieking shack with only Harry to witness his final moments. His last act was giving Harry his memories, the truth about his life, his love for Lily, his true allegiance. It wasn't redemption exactly. Snape had done too many cruel things, made too many terrible choices to be fully redeemed. But it was explanation, context, a final plea to be understood, if not forgiven. Barty Crouch Jr. is another fascinating and disturbing case. The son of a powerful ministry official, Barty was a brilliant student who fell completely under Voldemort's sway. His fanaticism rivaled Bellatrix's, and he participated in the torture of the Longbottoms with the same sadistic enthusiasm. He was caught, tried, and sentenced to Azkaban, but his mother, dying and desperate to save her son, convinced his father to smuggle Barty out using Polyjuice Potion. They swapped places. Mrs. Crouch died in Azkaban in Barty's place, and Barty spent years imprisoned in his own home under the Imperious Curse, hidden from the world. When he finally escaped, with Voldemort's help, Barty executed one of the most complex and audacious plans in the series. He kidnapped Alastor Moody, kept him imprisoned for an entire school year, and impersonated him perfectly using Polyjuice Potion. As the fake Moody, he taught defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, actually did a fairly good job of it ironically, and manipulated events to ensure Harry would reach the Triwizard Cup and be transported to the graveyard where Voldemort waited. It was brilliant in a horrible way, a year-long con that fooled Dumbledore himself. When he was finally revealed, when the Polyjuice wore off and his true identity was exposed, Barty seemed almost proud of what he'd accomplished, eager to tell his story, to brag about his cleverness and his loyalty to his master. His fate, receiving the Dementor's kiss before he could testify, was controversial. Some saw it as justice, others as a convenient silencing by Cornelius Fudge, who didn't want to believe that Voldemort had returned and certainly didn't want Barty confirming it publicly. Either way, Barty Crouch Jr. went from being a brilliant, promising young man to a soulless husk, destroyed by his own fanaticism and his father's inability to save him from himself. Not all Death Eaters were enthusiastic participants, though. Some were reluctant, forced into service through family pressure or direct coercion. Draco Malfoy, tasked with killing Dumbledore in his 6th year, is the clearest example. Draco wasn't ready for murder. He wasn't capable of it, not really, despite all his bravado and his belief in pure-blood supremacy. When the moment came, When he had Dumbledore wandless and helpless at the top of the astronomy tower, Draco couldn't do it. He lowered his wand. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, you saw that he was still just a 16-year-old boy who'd been raised on terrible ideology, but wasn't fundamentally a killer. Voldemort had given Draco that task, knowing he'd probably fail, punishing Lucius through his son, expecting Draco to die in the attempt. It was cruelty masquerading as opportunity. Draco's terror throughout that year, his desperate attempts to repair the vanishing cabinet, his knowledge that failure meant death for himself and his family, it aged him, broke something in him. By the end, he was just trying to survive, to keep his parents alive. Ideology be damned. Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, was motivated purely by cowardice and self-preservation. He'd been friends with James, Sirius, and Remus at school, been part of the Marauders, learned to become an animagus for Remus's sake. But when war came, Peter saw which way the wind was blowing and chose what he thought was the winning side. He became a spy for Voldemort, feeding information about the Order's operations, ultimately betraying the Potters when he was made their secret keeper. His betrayal led directly to their deaths, to Harry becoming an orphan, to Sirius being imprisoned for 12 years for crimes Peter committed. Peter spent those 12 years hiding as Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, living with a wizarding family where he could monitor Harry from a distance and avoid any Death Eaters who might seek revenge for Voldemort's downfall. When he was finally exposed, he fled to help Voldemort, assisting in his resurrection by cutting off his own hand as part of the ritual. Voldemort rewarded him with a silver hand, but never trusted him, never valued him as anything more than a useful worm. Peter's death was both ironic and fitting. The silver hand Voldemort gave him was enchanted to kill him if he showed any weakness or mercy. When Peter hesitated to strangle Harry in Malfoy Manor, when he showed a moment's gratitude for Harry once sparing his life, the hand turned on him, strangling him to death. It was a punishment built into the reward itself, typical of Voldemort's paranoia and cruelty. Regulus Black's story is quieter, but perhaps more genuinely heroic than any of the prominent Order members. Regulus was Sirius's younger brother, a true believer in pure-blood ideology who willingly joined the Death Eaters at a young age. His family was proud, his mother especially. Here was a son who believed in the old ways, who would uphold the Black family name. But something changed when Regulus saw what service to Voldemort actually meant. The ideology was one thing, the reality of torture and murder was another. When Voldemort took Kreacher to help hide a Horcrux, using the house elf as expendable, leaving him to die in that cave, it was the final straw for Regulus. Kreacher survived and told Regulus what had happened. Regulus figured out what the locket was, understood the implications of Voldemort creating Horcruxes, and decided to act. He ordered Kreacher to take him to the cave, drank the poison himself so Kreacher wouldn't have to, and retrieved the Horcrux. He left a note for Voldemort, signed R.A.B., saying he knew the secret and would destroy the Horcrux. Then he told Kreacher to leave, to take the locket and destroy it, and he died there in that cave, pulled under by Inferi. Kreacher couldn't destroy the locket, couldn't complete his master's final order, and that failure haunted him for years. But Regulus's act was still profoundly brave. He turned against the most powerful dark wizard in history, knowing it would mean his death, because it was the right thing to do. No glory, no recognition. No one even knew what he'd done until Harry discovered the truth years later. Just a young man, barely out of school, choosing to die fighting against evil, even though he'd once believed in it. The Death Eaters' tactics were designed to spread maximum terror. They didn't just kill, they tortured, they made examples, they destroyed entire families to prove a point. The dark mark appearing over a house meant everyone inside was dead. Attacks were often public, designed to show that nobody was safe, that the ministry couldn't protect its citizens. They infiltrated the ministry itself, placing operatives in key positions, corrupting officials through bribery or the imperious curse. The torture wasn't just about extracting information, though that was part of it. It was about demonstrating power, breaking spirits, showing what happened to those who opposed Voldemort. The Cruciatus Curse was the Death Eaters' favorite tool, pain without physical damage, leaving victims broken mentally while their bodies remained intact. It was horror refined to its purest form. Standing against the Death Eaters, often outnumbered and fighting a losing battle, was the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore created the Order during the First Wizarding War as a resistance group, operating outside official channels. The Ministry was ineffective, compromised, unable, or unwilling to take the necessary actions to fight Voldemort. So Dumbledore gathered those willing to fight, creating a secret organization dedicated to opposing the Death Eaters through whatever means necessary. The original Order included some of the most capable witches and wizards of their generation. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and tragically Peter Pettigrew all joined. They were young, brave, perhaps a bit reckless, but absolutely committed to fighting against Voldemort. Lily Potter joined after leaving Hogwarts, despite being Muggle-born and therefore a primary target. The Prewett brothers, Gideon and Fabian, Molly Weasley's brothers, fought with distinction until they were killed by 5 Death Eaters, taking several of their attackers with them. The McKinnons were an entire family of Order members, all murdered in a single coordinated attack. Marlene McKinnon and her whole family wiped out to send a message. These weren't soldiers or Aurors with training. These were ordinary people, families, individuals who believed in fighting for what was right, even knowing they'd likely die for it. The Order operated in secret because they had to. If the Death Eaters knew who was in the Order, they'd target their families, their homes, everyone they loved. Meetings were held in hidden locations, protected by the Fidelius Charm and other powerful magic. Information was compartmentalized. Missions were carried out by small teams. Everyone used code names and secret signals. It was guerrilla warfare, asymmetric, designed to harass and hinder the Death Eaters, while staying alive long enough to matter. When the Second Wizarding War began, when Voldemort returned and the Ministry again refused to acknowledge the threat, Dumbledore reformed the Order. Many original members rejoined, joined by new recruits, younger witches and wizards who'd grown up in the peace won by the First Order and were now called to fight for it again. 12 Grimmauld Place, Sirius's family home, became the Order's headquarters. It was protected by every charm and ward Dumbledore could manage. Most importantly, the Fidelius Charm, with Dumbledore as secret keeper. You couldn't find it unless Dumbledore told you the secret personally. Even standing on the street, looking at the buildings on either side, you wouldn't see number 12 unless you knew it was there. Inside, the house was dark, gloomy, filled with black family artifacts and memorabilia glorifying pure-blood supremacy. Mrs. Black's portrait screamed insults at anyone with Muggle blood or anyone she deemed a blood traitor. It wasn't a comfortable headquarters, but it was safe, and that mattered more than comfort. Creature was a constant problem at first, loyal to his dead mistress's values, resentful of everyone using the house. He gave information to Narcissa Malfoy, which contributed to Sirius's death. But after that, after Harry learned to treat him with respect, Creature changed. By the end, he was fighting for the Order, leading the Hogwarts house elves into battle, proving that even the most bitter hearts could be turned with kindness. The Second Order included some remarkable individuals. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody was perhaps the most skilled Auror of his generation, paranoid to the point of absurdity, but his paranoia was justified by experience. He'd survived countless attacks, lost an eye and a leg to Death Eaters, and his magical eye and wooden leg were constant reminders of the price of fighting dark wizards. His rules, constant vigilance, never trust anyone completely, always have an escape route, seemed excessive until you remembered that he was only alive because he followed them. His death during the Battle of the Seven Potters, falling from his broom after being hit by a killing curse, was a devastating loss. If Mad-Eye Moody could be killed, anyone could. Kingsley Shacklebolt worked as an Auror within the Ministry while secretly feeding information to the Order. It was an incredibly dangerous position, requiring him to appear loyal to increasingly corrupt administrations while actually undermining them. When Voldemort took control of the Ministry, Kingsley was one of the few Ministry employees who continued fighting, eventually becoming Minister for Magic after Voldemort's defeat. Nymphadora Tonks, who preferred just being called Tonks, was young, enthusiastic, a metamorphmagus who could change her appearance at will. She brought energy and optimism to the Order, fell in love with Remus Lupin despite his werewolf status and self-loathing, and fought brilliantly. Her death alongside Remus in the Battle of Hogwarts, leaving their infant son Teddy an orphan just as Harry had been orphaned, was one of the cruelest ironies of the war. Remus Lupin, the last marauder standing, carried the weight of all his lost friends. James and Lily murdered, Sirius imprisoned, then killed, Peter a traitor. He'd lost everyone he'd loved, survived when perhaps he'd rather not have, and continued fighting because it's what James would have wanted, what Sirius died for. His relationship with Tonks gave him hope again, something to fight for beyond mere survival. Their deaths together felt somehow appropriate, tragic but unified. Two people who'd found love in the midst of war, dying to protect the world their son would grow up in. Arthur and Molly Weasley were the heart of the Order in many ways. Their home, the Burrow, served as a secondary headquarters, a place where Order members could gather more informally. They'd lost Molly's brothers in the First War, knew the cost personally, but never wavered in their commitment. Arthur worked in the Ministry, quietly gathering information and protecting Muggle-born wizards where he could. Molly kept everyone fed, worried over everyone like they were her children, and when pushed, proved she could duel with the best of them. Her defeat of Bellatrix showed that you don't need to be a trained Auror or a powerful dark wizard to be dangerous. Sometimes a mother protecting her children is the most dangerous thing in the world. Even Mundungus Fletcher, unreliable and frequently drunk, played a role. He was a thief and a black market dealer, morally ambiguous at best, but he had connections and information that the Order needed. He wasn't particularly brave, fled danger whenever possible, but he kept showing up, kept helping in his own cowardly way. The Order's operations were varied and constant. Guard duty rotations protecting Harry, intelligence gathering from ministry contacts and other sources, rescuing targeted Muggle-borns and moving them to safety, disrupting Death Eater plans wherever possible. The Seven Potters plan, where 6 people took Polyjuice Potion to look like Harry, creating 7 identical targets to confuse the Death Eaters during Harry's escape from Privet Drive, was brilliant and desperate. They knew Voldemort would be waiting, knew there would be casualties, but they did it anyway because Harry had to be moved, and this gave him the best chance. Mad Eye died in that operation. George lost an ear. Hedwig was killed. But Harry survived, which was the point. Every operation had a cost, and the Order paid it repeatedly. But they kept fighting because the alternative was letting Voldemort win, and that was unacceptable. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts arrived, the Order had been fighting for years, losing members steadily, watching the world they were trying to protect grow darker and more oppressed. But they showed up for that final battle, joined by students and teachers, by parents of Hogwarts students, by anyone who could hold a wand and wanted to fight. The Order of the Phoenix wasn't just an organization by then, it was an idea, the belief that standing against evil mattered even when victory seemed impossible. The casualties from the Order were staggering. Mad-Eye Moody, Tonks and Lupin, Fred Weasley, whose death broke something in his twin George that would never fully heal, Colin Creevey, who was still underage and snuck back to fight anyway. 50 deaths total by the end of the battle, and each one represented someone who'd chosen to fight rather than hide, to risk everything for a chance at a better world. Speaking of Voldemort, we should probably talk about the man himself, or rather, the thing he became, because by the end, there wasn't much human left in him. Tom Riddle started as a handsome, charismatic student, brilliant and ambitious, capable of charming almost anyone. The orphan who discovered he was special, that he had magic, that he was descended from Salazar Slytherin himself. That knowledge shaped him, fed his belief that he was destined for greatness, that ordinary rules didn't apply to him. At Hogwarts, Tom was the perfect student on the surface. Prefect, head boy, excellent grades, charming to his teachers, particularly to Dumbledore initially. But underneath, he was already exploring dark magic, already hurting people, already experimenting with things that should have remained theoretical. He opened the Chamber of Secrets during his 5th year, used the basilisk to kill Moaning Myrtle, and framed Hagrid for it. He was 16 years old and already a murderer, already capable of condemning an innocent person to Azkaban without a second thought. After leaving Hogwarts, Tom Riddle disappeared for years, traveling, learning, gathering power and followers. He visited his Muggle father's family in Little Hangleton and murdered them, his father, his grandparents, killed them in their home, and framed the Muggle gardener for it. That murder created his first Horcrux, the diary, splitting his soul by committing the ultimate evil. It was the beginning of his transformation from Tom Riddle into Lord Voldemort, the shedding of his Muggle name and heritage, the embrace of his pure-blood Slytherin lineage while rejecting everything about his Muggle father. The First Wizarding War began in the early 70s, and for nearly a decade, Voldemort and his Death Eaters spread terror across Britain. People were afraid to speak his name, calling him you-know-who, or he who must not be named instead, as if saying Voldemort might summon him. In a way, that fear was his greatest weapon. When people won't even name their enemy, when they're too afraid to speak against him, he's already half won. Families were torn apart during that war, some by death, some by ideology. Pure-blood families had to choose sides, and those choices fractured relationships that had lasted generations. The Blacks split, with Sirius rejecting his family's beliefs while Regulus initially embraced them. The Malfoys thrived under Voldemort's rise. The Weasleys were targeted as blood traitors. Nobody was neutral. You were either with Voldemort or against him, and being against him often meant death. Halloween 1981 changed everything. Voldemort had learned of the prophecy that spoke of a child who could defeat him, and he decided that child was Harry Potter. Peter Pettigrew betrayed the Potters, revealed their location despite being their secret keeper, and Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. He killed James first, then went upstairs where Lily was protecting Harry. He offered to spare her, wanted only the child, but Lily refused. She died protecting her son, and that sacrifice, that ancient magic of a mother's love, did what no spell or curse could do. When Voldemort cast the killing curse at Harry, it rebounded, destroying Voldemort's body and leaving Harry with a lightning bolt scar. Voldemort didn't die, though. His Horcruxes kept him tethered to life, his soul too fragmented to move on. He fled as a wraith, barely conscious, less than spirit, hiding in forests and dark places, unable to interact with the world, but unable to die. For 10 years he existed in this diminished state, in Albania eventually, possessing small animals to survive, desperate and degraded. His attempt to return through the diary failed when Harry destroyed it. His time possessing Quirrell gave him limited form but cost Quirrell his life. It wasn't until Peter found him in Albania and brought him back to Britain that Voldemort began his true resurrection. The ritual in the graveyard at Little Hangleton required 3 ingredients: bone of the father unknowingly given, flesh of the servant willingly sacrificed, and blood of the enemy forcibly taken. They robbed his father's grave, Peter cut off his own hand, and they took Harry's blood. The ritual worked, and Voldemort returned with a body again, though horribly changed, more serpentine than human, red eyes, slits for nostrils, a face that barely looked like Tom Riddle at all. Taking Harry's blood was meant to bypass the protection Lily's sacrifice had given, but it actually did something Voldemort didn't anticipate. It tethered Harry to life as long as Voldemort lived, made it so Voldemort couldn't kill him. Dumbledore understood this, called it Voldemort's greatest mistake, but Voldemort was too arrogant to see it. The Ministry's denial of Voldemort's return gave him a year to rebuild his forces in secret, to gather Death Eaters and recruit new followers, to plan his takeover. When he finally revealed himself publicly, when he appeared at the Ministry and dueled Dumbledore, the Ministry could no longer deny reality. But by then, Voldemort was too strong to stop quickly. His reign of terror during the Second War was worse than the first in many ways. He took over the Ministry, installed Death Eaters in positions of power, created the Muggle-born Registration Commission, which was basically a way to legalize genocide. Muggle-borns were required to register, to prove they hadn't stolen magic from real wizards, and when they couldn't prove the impossible, they were sent to Azkaban or killed. Families were torn apart, children taken from their parents, an entire segment of the wizarding population systematically persecuted. At Hogwarts, the Carrows, Alecto, and Amicus were made teachers, Muggle studies and dark arts, respectively. They taught hatred and practiced torture, used students as test subjects for curses, turned the school into a place of fear rather than learning. The Cruciatus Curse became a standard punishment. Neville, Luna, Ginny, and others led a resistance from within, protecting younger students, defying the Carrows wherever possible, keeping hope alive in that darkest year. Voldemort placed a taboo on his own name, making it so that anyone who spoke Voldemort could be tracked and captured. It was a clever piece of magic, using people's growing courage against them. Those brave enough to name him were exactly the ones most likely to oppose him, and the taboo let Snatchers find them. That's how Harry, Ron, and Hermione were caught and brought to Malfoy Manor. The Battle of Hogwarts started when Professor McGonagall, newly in control after casting the Imperious Curse off herself, activated all the castle's defenses and called everyone who'd ever fought for Hogwarts to return and fight again. The protective enchantment she placed around the grounds, the animated suits of armor and statues that marched to defend the castle, it was magic on a scale rarely seen. Her line, "I've always wanted to use that spell," about bringing the statues to life was perfect, a moment of joy and excitement in the midst of preparing for battle. The Death Eaters came with giants and spiders, with curses and flames, intent on destroying Hogwarts utterly. The battle raged through the castle and grounds, a chaotic, desperate fight. Molly's duel with Bellatrix happened near the end, when Bellatrix nearly killed Ginny, and Molly stepped in with a fury that exceeded any magic Bellatrix had faced. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" And then a killing curse that ended Bellatrix Lestrange, perhaps the most satisfying death in the entire series. After an hour of fighting, Voldemort called a ceasefire, giving them time to collect their dead and surrender. The sight of the bodies in the Great Hall, Fred lying there with a final smile on his face, Lupin and Tonks side by side, Colin Creevey so young and still, it broke something in everyone who saw it. These were their friends, their family, their teachers. The cost of resistance laid out in rows, a price paid in blood and grief. Harry's decision to walk to his death, to let Voldemort kill him, was the most courageous act in the entire series. He used the Resurrection Stone to bring back his parents, Sirius and Lupin, not as ghosts, but as something close, spirits, there to give him strength for those final steps. They walked with him to the forest, told him they were proud, that he was brave, that death wasn't frightening when you weren't alone. Then Harry went forward to face Voldemort without raising his wand, accepting death to save everyone else. The killing curse hit him, and Harry found himself in a strange limbo, King's Cross Station, but not really, clean and bright and empty, except for Dumbledore and something small and pitiful crying under a bench. The piece of Voldemort's soul that had lived in Harry, now destroyed and helpless. Dumbledore explained everything, how Harry could choose to go back or move on, how Voldemort's use of Harry's blood meant Harry was anchored to life through Voldemort, how it had all worked out precisely as Dumbledore had hoped. Harry chose to return, to finish what he'd started. When he revealed himself alive during the final confrontation, when Neville killed Nagini with Gryffindor's sword, destroying the last Horcrux, Voldemort became mortal again. The final duel wasn't long or elaborate. Harry explained about wand allegiance, how Draco had disarmed Dumbledore, making the Elder Wand his, how Harry had disarmed Draco, making it Harry's, how Voldemort's borrowed wand would never work against its true master. Voldemort cast Avada Kedavra, Harry cast Expelliarmus, and the Elder Wand refused to kill its master. The killing curse rebounded, and Tom Riddle died, truly died this time, falling to the ground as an ordinary corpse. The aftermath was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No triumph, no celebration, just exhaustion and relief and grief. Peace had finally been achieved, but at such a cost. So many dead, so many families broken, So much darkness to recover from. But they'd won. The wizarding world was free, and the future, however uncertain, was theirs again to shape. And that, my dear friends, brings us nearly to the end of our journey through these darker corners and brighter moments of the wizarding world. We've wandered through discussions of Dementors and dragons, of Death Eaters and the Order, of Voldemort's rise and fall, and all the complicated, beautiful, terrible things that make this universe feel so real. It's a world where darkness exists, genuine evil that must be fought, but also where ordinary people find extraordinary courage, where love proves stronger than death, where hope persists even in the darkest times. I hope this has been a cozy journey for you, a gentle exploration of heavy topics, reminding you why these stories matter, why we return to them again and again. The Harry Potter universe, for all its magic and wonder, tells fundamentally human stories about choice, about sacrifice, about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. And maybe that's why we love it so much, because it reminds us that we all have that capacity within us, that courage and kindness and love aren't magical at all. They're simply human. Sleep well, dear witches and wizards. May your dreams be filled with Patronuses and Phoenixes, with Hogwarts feasts and Quidditch matches, with all the light and magic that makes this world worth fighting for. Until next time, and mischief managed.